Danielle Ross walked into court, accused of stealing $2 million from the company she once helped build, branded a thief, and abandoned by those she trusted. All she wanted was to clear her name for herself and for her son. But as she faced a powerful CEO and a justice system stacked against her, one unexpected move from the FBI would change everything. What if the woman they tried to silence held the key to exposing something far bigger than anyone imagined? If this story grabs your attention, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Let's dive in. It was just past 9 a.m. when the heavy doors of courtroom 4B creaked open, and Danielle Ross stepped inside, head-high shoulders, back but heart pounding beneath her gray suit like a drum against war. The gallery was already packed. Reporters filled the first 2 rows, pens poised, eyes sharp. Spectators whispered behind cupped hands. Some looked curious, others hungry, and a few didn't even bother to hide their contempt. They'd already decided. To them, she wasn't Danielle Ross, senior financial analyst, loyal employee, single mother. She was just another greedy executive who got caught. At the plaintiff's table, Charles Whitaker sat like a man untouched by storms. His suit was navy, his tie perfectly knotted. He didn't glance at Danielle as she entered, not even once, but the slight tilt of his chin spoke volumes. This wasn't justice to him. It was theater, a performance, and he'd already written the ending. Then came the voice, firm, polished, confident. The state of Georgia versus Danielle Ross. Victor Langley, the lead prosecutor, stood tall with practiced elegance as he addressed the jury. His voice was calm but edged with venom, as if each word was dipped in judgment. Ladies and gentlemen, today you will hear how Ms. Ross, entrusted with the financial heart of Whitaker Development Group, abused that trust. You will see records, witnesses, timelines, and by the time we're done, the facts will speak for themselves. $2 million. Gone. Misdirected. Transferred. And all of it. He paused, his gaze drifting toward her like a final nail in a coffin under her supervision. Danielle didn't flinch, but she felt it. That moment. The weight of it pressing down on her chest. Ethan Miles, her attorney, leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "Breathe. Let them perform. We're just getting started." She nodded, though the knot in her throat wouldn't loosen. Her eyes scanned the room, locking eyes with no one in particular. But the stares hit like stones. Cold, judging. No sympathy, no questions. Just the quiet, cruel satisfaction of watching someone fall. A camera flash burst from the gallery. Then another. And then the voice she hadn't wanted to hear, the one that cut through noise like a blade. Ms. Ross came. Carla Monroe's sharp tone, her pen tapping impatiently on her notepad. "What will you tell your son when he asks if you stole from your own company?" Danielle froze, just for a moment. Her son, Max. 10 years old, brilliant and kind, with a habit of hiding notes in her purse that read, "I love you, Mom." What would she tell him? She didn't answer. Carla didn't wait for one. The judge's gavel cracked through the air. Order, no interruptions. Danielle sat. Her fingers gripped the edge of the defense table so tightly, her knuckles whitened. She could still remember, barely 6 months ago, the sound of her office keyboard, the hum of the vending machine down the hall, the late-night coffee runs while everyone else had gone home. She had stayed. Because she believed in the numbers, in the work, in doing it right. She hadn't stumbled on the discrepancy by accident. It had started with a missing invoice. Just one. Then a duplicated transaction that didn't match the client's ledger. It was small, barely noticeable, but Danielle didn't ignore it. She followed it, layer by layer, company by company, until she reached a name she didn't recognize, Clearway Holdings. When she brought it to Charles, he didn't shout. He didn't even blink. He smiled. "You're working too hard, Danielle," he said with a hand on her shoulder. "Let it go. We don't want to make a mistake chasing shadows, do we?" That same night, she went back to the office. Alone. She pulled 3 years of records, flagged every irregularity she could find, and wrote a memo outlining the inconsistencies. She never sent it. She never got the chance. The next morning, security guards walked into her office. No warning, no explanation. In front of her entire team, They asked her to shut down her computer, gather her belongings, and follow them to the lobby. The look on her assistant's face, shocked, confused hurt that would never leave her. And now here she was under lights far brighter than those in any boardroom, her character on trial before strangers with no reason to believe her, and every reason to believe the man who sat across the room, smiling like he owned the world. The judge called for opening statements. Victor Langley began again. Danielle forced herself to focus, though her thoughts drifted. She remembered Max's face that morning before school. He had touched her cheek and said, "You're still my hero, okay?" She hadn't known whether to cry or laugh. Now she sat steel in her spine, but glass behind her ribs, and told herself, "You didn't steal anything. You followed the numbers. You did the right thing." But would that be enough? Would anyone in this room ever believe it? She glanced at Charles once more. He was still smiling, and for the first time since all of this began, Danielle felt something shift. Not fear, not shame, but a slow, burning kind of fury. And fury doesn't plead. It fights. She remembered the moment it began, not with drama or sirens, but with a single number that didn't add up. Danielle sat alone in the office that night, eyes aching under the blue glare of the screen. It was almost midnight. Everyone else had gone home. But something had been bothering her all week. A $17, $230 transfer. Recurring. Always routed to the same obscure account, Clearway Holdings. She leaned forward, frowning. There was no matching project code, no invoice, no approval email, just a string of quiet payments, each one seemingly invisible to everyone but her. She pulled out a notepad and began to write. Clearway Holdings, Cayman Islands, registered last year, linked to... nothing. Her pen paused. The more she traced, the more it looked like someone was laundering money right under their noses. The next morning, she went straight to Charles Whitaker's office. He looked up from his espresso, his suit crisp as always, his smile cool. "Danielle," he said, folding his hands. "Something on your mind." She slid the file across his desk. "There's a pattern here. Money's being diverted small amounts just under the reporting threshold. But over time, it adds up. Millions." Charles barely glanced at it. "I see," he said, tapping the folder once. Then his tone shifted. "You've always been thorough, loyal. That's why I brought you in." Danielle didn't flinch. "If this gets out our shareholders..." He cut her off. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." He leaned in now, voice lower. "Listen carefully. The deeper you dig, the more you'll lose." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" Charles smiled. "I'm advising you to let it go." Danielle stood still for a moment, heart racing. "I won't be part of something criminal," she said quietly. Charles's eyes turned cold. "Then I'm afraid you've just made a mistake." A week later, she paid the price. She walked into work like any other day, but something was off. Her badge didn't beep. Her computer was gone. Security was waiting. And then came the words, "Aim, Danielle Ross. You're under arrest for embezzlement and corporate theft." Gasps echoed across the office floor. Phones came up. Someone whispered her name like a curse. She felt the handcuffs lock behind her back, and the world went silent except for the click of cameras. By lunchtime, her face was on every newsfeed. Whitaker whistleblower or white-collar thief. $1 million analyst caught in web of fraud. They didn't want answers. They wanted a villain. Later that day in the holding cell, cold, sterile, and humming with fluorescent light, she met him. "I'm Ethan Miles," the man said, walking in with a stack of papers. "Your court-appointed attorney." She looked up exhausted. "Have you read the charges?" He sat down. "I have, and I've also read between the lines." Danielle gave a bitter smile. "Everyone else sees guilt. You see lines." He pulled out a document. Clearway Holdings, offshore, registered to a ghost director. "And look at this, 3 payments were filed on days you weren't even logged in." She blinked. "You were set up, Danielle," he said. "Someone's laundering money and they needed a fall person. You were the easiest one to frame." Danielle leaned back. "So what now?" "I build a case," Ethan said. "You give me every detail you remember, everything they don't expect you to know." She hesitated. "And if I lose?" He met her eyes. "Then we make sure the truth doesn't." But outside that cell, truth wasn't what people were looking for. Her neighbor crossed the street when she stepped outside. Friends stopped replying. Max's school sent an email. Maybe it's best he takes a few days off. Even Carla, a woman who used to send her holiday cards, posted, "Sometimes the people you trust most are hiding the darkest secrets." The isolation was brutal, but not unexpected. And yet, in the middle of that silence, there was one voice that hadn't changed. One night, as Danielle folded Max's laundry, she found a note stuffed inside his sweater pocket. "You didn't do anything wrong. I know it. Love, Max." Her fingers trembled. She pressed the note to her chest and breathed in deep. That was all she needed. She wasn't just fighting for her name. She was fighting to show her son that truth still mattered, that courage didn't vanish when the world turned against you. And deep down, she knew something else. If Charles Whitaker had gone this far to silence her, then he was hiding something even bigger. And whoever had framed her wasn't finished yet. The courtroom had grown colder since that first day. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Danielle could feel it thick in the air, like judgment settled into the very walls. And now, seated beside Ethan, her palms pressed tightly together, she heard her own name echo from the witness stand. But this time, not from a prosecutor or a stranger. Stacy Brooke, the bailiff, called. Danielle's eyes shifted slowly to the woman rising from the crowd. Stacy, once her assistant, once her mentee, walked with clipped heels and eyes that didn't flinch. She took the oath like someone who'd rehearsed it. And when she sat down, she didn't even glance at Danielle. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Miss Brooke, in your role as executive assistant to Mr. Charles Whitaker, were you ever aware of Ms. Ross accessing secure systems without authorization?" There was a pause. It wasn't hesitation. It was preparation. "Yes," Stacy said clearly. "I saw Danielle log in after hours multiple times. She accessed financial archives from restricted folders. When I asked about it, she told me not to worry." Danielle's breath caught. That wasn't true. She had been investigating the irregularities. She had confided in no one, not even Stacy. She'd told herself it was to protect her assistant. Now she saw it had protected no one. Ethan leaned in, whispering, "Don't react, let it land." But it already had. Next came Mark Renshaw. He had worked 2 cubicles away from her for nearly 5 years. She had once brought him soup when he was sick, once vouched for his promotion. Now he stood in front of the jury, avoiding her eyes. "Ms. Ross was always intense," Mark said. "She worked odd hours, was secretive. I overheard her talking about covering her tracks one evening." Ethan objected. "Speculation, no recording, no context. Sustained," the judge said. But the damage had settled. Danielle sat frozen. These weren't just accusations, they were weapons sharpened by familiarity. Every word twisted the truth just enough to sound reasonable. Every face she had once trusted was now a mask turned away from her. Ethan tried. He stood cross-examined, pressed. "Miss Brooke, did you ever witness Ms. Ross transfer funds? Did you ever see a paper trail connecting her to Clearway Holdings?" "No," Stacy admitted. But she always knew how to hide her tracks. That line landed like a nail. Ethan shifted. "So you're saying she was too skilled to be caught?" "That's not evidence, Miss Brooke. That's speculation disguised as certainty." But the jury didn't react. They weren't listening to logic anymore. They were listening to the tone. And the tone had shifted. Back at the table, Danielle stared straight ahead. She wasn't sure what hurt more, their words, or the silence of everyone else. No one came to her defense. No one stood up and said, "That's not who she is." Not one person. She turned to Ethan. "Did you see that coming?" "I hoped it wouldn't happen," he said. "But I've seen it before. People protect what they think is safest. And right now, that's not you." Danielle gave a dry laugh. "So loyalty dies the moment risk walks in the room." He didn't answer. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed again. She kept her head down. The questions followed her down the hall like shadows. "Danielle, do you deny the testimonies? Why would your own friends lie? Do you feel guilty about your son?" She stopped. The last question hit something raw. Max. She hadn't seen him in days. Not since the trial began. Her mother had taken him out of state, away from the news, away from the chaos. But every night she pictured his face, his little voice asking questions, his innocent heart caught in a storm he couldn't name. She had no idea what he'd been told, or what he believed. Later, in the quiet of her holding room, Danielle sat at the metal table staring at nothing. The sting of betrayal still heavy in her chest. "If I fail," she whispered to herself, "what will Max grow up thinking of me?" She had always told him the truth mattered. That courage meant standing alone, even when no one believed you. That doing the right thing wasn't always rewarded, but it was always worth it. Now she wondered if that had all been a lie. A soft knock came on the door. Ethan stepped in. He looked exhausted. His sleeves were rolled up tie-loose, eyes heavy. "They hit harder than I expected," he said. Danielle didn't answer. "But we're not done," he added. "We still have a shot. It's thin, but it's real. We just need something solid to crack their case." She looked at him quietly. "Do you believe me, Ethan? Not just the facts. Do you believe me?" He didn't hesitate. Yeah, she nodded once, because in that moment, belief was all she had. And if she had even one person left in her corner, maybe, just maybe, that was still enough to fight. What she didn't know was that someone else had started watching, and they were about to change everything. It began with something so subtle that Danielle almost brushed it off. A black SUV, parked across the street. The first time she noticed it, she was standing in her kitchen holding a mug of tea. The car didn't move. No one stepped out. It just sat there. Engine humming faintly, windows tinted too dark to see inside. An hour later it was gone, but the next day it was back. Different spot, same model, no plates. She mentioned it to Ethan that evening, half laughing. Probably just someone visiting a neighbor. Ethan didn't laugh. "Don't shrug it off, you're not paranoid, not with what you're up against." That night, Danielle double-checked every lock in the house. When she peeked through the front blinds, the SUV was still there. Headlights off, waiting. By morning, it was gone again. But in its place, lying neatly on her front steps, was a brown envelope. No name, no postage, no fingerprints. She picked it up slowly, fingers trembling just enough to make the paper crinkle. Inside, she found printed spreadsheets, her own financial audits from months ago, marked in red. Entire sections were crossed out, circled, annotated in handwriting she didn't recognize. And at the bottom, in thick black ink, someone had written one sentence. "Stop digging. Think of your son." She sat down hard on the front steps, the envelope still open in her lap. For a long moment, she just stared at it. The threat wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, and it was real. Later that afternoon, she went to the police. A young officer behind the desk barely glanced at the envelope. "Looks like a prank, ma'am. Could have been anyone." Danielle pressed the papers to the counter. "My name is on every page. These were internal company documents, and I never made these notes. Someone accessed private files and left them on my porch." The officer shrugged. "Without a direct threat, there's not much we can do. You said it was anonymous." She stared at him, stunned. "So you'll wait until something happens?" He offered a tired look. "Come back if it escalates." Back outside, the sun felt too bright. Everything looked normal, kids on bikes, sprinklers running across manicured lawns. But to Danielle, it felt staged, too quiet, like the calm right before a storm. She called Ethan from the car. "It's not just legal anymore," she said. "They're trying to scare me." Ethan's voice was tight. "You need to stay calm. Whoever left that message wanted a reaction. Fear is leverage. Don't give it to them." She wanted to believe him. But that night, as she tucked Max into bed, she saw his little eyes watching her closely. "Did something happen today?" he asked. Danielle forced a smile. "Just grown-up stuff." Max nodded. Then his voice dropped, soft and unsure. "Mom, if I disappeared, would you come find me?" The question didn't land. It exploded inside her. Her heart stopped. She couldn't breathe for a second. She leaned down, hands on his shoulders. "What do you mean, Max? Why would you say that?" He looked down, picking at the edge of his blanket. "Just, the kids at school said you're in trouble. They said sometimes people don't come back when they're in trouble." Danielle pulled him close, holding him tighter than she had in days. "Listen to me," she whispered. "If anything ever happened to you, there isn't a place on earth I wouldn't go. No one, nothing could keep me from finding you. Ever." He nodded, pressing his face into her shoulder. But even as she held him, something in her mind cracked wide open. This wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a test. They were watching her, studying what mattered most. And now they knew her son wasn't just a child. He was a target. When Max fell asleep, she stood by his door for nearly an hour, staring at the shadows on the wall, listening to every creak, every sound outside the window. The next morning, she called Ethan again. "If they're following me," she said, "they've probably tapped into everything. Phone, internet, documents. I need to disappear from their radar." Ethan hesitated. "I know someone who might help with that." Quietly. "No records, but it's a risk." Danielle didn't even blink. So is doing nothing. Danielle hadn't spoken to anyone all morning. She hadn't checked her phone, hadn't read the news, hadn't even turned on the lights. Her world had narrowed into something quiet, fragile, and full of dread. Until the knock on the coffee shop window. She turned. A man was outside staring straight at her through the glass, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a sharp gray suit. His expression wasn't threatening, but it wasn't friendly either, just focused. He opened the door, stepped in without hesitation, and stopped right in front of her table. Danielle Ross. His voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. She stiffened. Who's asking? He slipped a badge from his inner coat pocket, quick, subtle. Agent Leo Grant, FBI. She blinked. Of course you are. Grant took the chair across from her, pulled it out with practiced ease, and sat down. We need to talk. You're in deeper than you think. She leaned back slowly. I'm already facing felony charges for $2 million I didn't touch. How much deeper can it get? Grant opened a small folder and slid it toward her. Charles Whitaker isn't just stealing money. He's part of an international laundering network that's moved over $200 million through fake construction bids and shell companies across 3 continents. You stumbled on one of the pipeline's Clearway holdings. Danielle frowned. I told the auditors. I flagged it. I even asked Charles about it. And now I'm the one in court. Grant nodded. Exactly. You're the only one who followed the paper trail. The only one who asked the wrong questions. She looked down at the folder but didn't touch it. Why now? Why not come to me before the arrest? Before they paraded me in front of my son? Grant's gaze didn't waver. Because you're the only proof we have that hasn't disappeared. The only one they underestimated. If we approached too soon, they'd have erased you like they did the others. Her eyes narrowed. So I'm bait, is that it? No. You're leverage. Danielle stood. I'm done being used. But Grant didn't flinch. They already tried to scare you, didn't they? The SUV, the package, the message about your son. She froze mid-step. He continued. This is what they do. Isolate, threaten, and if that fails, silence. Permanently. You think they'll stop because you're not a threat anymore. Her voice was low, cold. What exactly do you want from me? We want you to work with us. Quietly. Behind the scenes. We can't touch Charles yet, but you're close enough to shake his foundation. If you're willing. She folded her arms. And if I'm not, Grant stood too. Then we both lose. You go to prison. We lose our only credible insider. Charles gets promoted. The world moves on. There was silence. Heavy, brittle silence. Then Danielle said, My son. Max. I want full protection. No interviews. No surveillance near school. No agents showing up pretending to be teachers or neighbors. Grant nodded. Already in motion. He's under discreet observation as of yesterday. She stared at him for a long time. And you'll protect me. He didn't blink. We'll protect the truth. But yes, we'll protect you too. Danielle picked up the folder, now opened it slowly. Inside were names, transfers, bank codes, timestamps that matched her memory, notes scribbled in another hand. The exact data she'd once seen before it vanished from the company's network. She looked up and her voice was steady. I want a copy of everything. No blacked out lines, no redacted pages. You'll get it. And if I go down, she said, I'll make sure he burns with me. Grant let out a breath, not relief, not fear, just understanding. Then we're in business. She closed the folder and tucked it under her arm. Not business agent Grant, she said, walking past him. This is personal. It was just after 3 p.m. when the phone rang. Danielle had just stepped out of a deposition prep meeting with Ethan when her screen lit up with the school's number. Her pulse kicked. It wasn't Max's teacher, it was the school principal. Ms. Ross, the voice said calmly. We had a man here to pick up Max today. Said he worked with you, that you were caught up in court and sent him instead. Danielle's body went still. What was his name? He said Kyle. No last name. Had a clipboard ID badge that looked off. Ms. Jefferson, Max's teacher, felt something was wrong. She refused to release him. The man got irritated and left before we could get security to the front gate. Danielle didn't even answer. She was already grabbing her bag. Ethan followed her, concerned. What's going on? They tried to take Max. By the time they reached the school, Agent Grant was already there. He stood by the front entrance, listening to Jefferson's account, his arms crossed, jaw clenched. When he saw Danielle, his face didn't change. They're escalating, he said. This isn't just intimidation anymore. This is pressure. They want you scared enough to vanish. Danielle stared at the empty sidewalk in front of the school. Her fists were trembling. You said you'd protect him. We did, Grant said. And we are. From now on, Max gets full detail coverage. School to home. Home to court. He won't be alone again. Danielle's voice cracked. And when does it stop, Agent Grant? When I break down. When I'm too afraid to testify. Because that's what this is. He didn't answer, because she already knew. That night, she didn't speak to Ethan. She didn't open her laptop, didn't touch her legal notes. She just sat at the kitchen table in the dark, listening to the refrigerator hum and the ceiling fan tick. She couldn't protect her son, not really. Not from men who had no names, no faces, no fear of the law. Maybe this fight wasn't worth it. Maybe all it would cost her was the one person she couldn't afford to lose. By midnight, she called Ethan. Her voice was flat. I'm taking the deal. There was silence on the other end. You don't have to do this, Ethan said. We're close. If we keep pushing, I'm not risking my son's life for a trial that may not even give us justice. You'll go to prison, Danielle. You'll have that label. Embezzlement. Fraud. I'll still be alive, she said. And so will Max. Before Ethan could argue, she hung up. She walked down the hall and opened Max's door. He was curled under the covers, one leg kicked out, his face soft and relaxed. For a moment, she just stood there, watching him breathe. Then he stirred, sat up slowly. He had something in his hand. Couldn't sleep, he said. I made something. He handed her a piece of paper, construction paper crayon, drawing the kind she hadn't seen in years. It was a picture of the woman in a cape, standing in front of a building that looked like a courthouse. Her fists were raised, mouth wide open. Below, a little boy with curly hair stood behind her, smiling. You're my hero, Max said quietly. You don't have to fly or anything. You just have to keep going. Danielle blinked hard. She held the drawing against her chest like it might stop her heart from cracking. She stayed up the rest of the night. At dawn, Ethan knocked on her door. He didn't ask how she was. He just held up a manila folder. I found something, he said, and it's not small. He dropped the folder on the table. Inside were internal transactions from one of Whitaker's subsidiaries, Altris Realty. On the surface, it was a real estate firm. But deeper down, it was a funnel millions quietly shifted into dummy projects and ghost companies then laundered out. This is the first real link to Charles himself, Ethan said. The name on these forms. It's his handwriting. Not a copy. Not a delegate. His. Danielle ran her finger across the signatures, her heart beating louder with each one. She knew that handwriting. Had filed dozens of forms under it. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was proof. She looked up. Does Grant know? Not yet. I wanted to show you first. Danielle nodded slowly. Tell him. We're not taking any deal. Not now. Ethan gave a slight smile. Was hoping you'd say that. Danielle turned toward the living room. Max was watching cartoons, completely unaware that his mom had just decided not to give in. That the war would go on. That she'd fight it not as a victim, but as a witness. As a mother. And maybe, in the end, as something far greater than either. She picked up Max's drawing again and pinned it on the fridge. Hero. Maybe not yet. But getting there. It was nearly dawn when Ethan arrived at Danielle's apartment, eyes red from too many hours staring at files. He looked like a man chasing ghosts and finally catching one. In his hand was a single folder. I found him, he said without preamble. Vincent Hale. Danielle blinked. Vincent. Former project director at Whitaker Development. Left 6 months before everything blew up. Quiet exit. No lawsuits, no press. He just disappeared. He opened the folder, revealing a grainy photo. A man with a scruffy beard standing outside a rundown gas station. His eyes, even in the photo, looked like someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. He was running logistics on the same accounts your name got tied to. Grant tracked financial metadata Vincent's approvals line up right before the fake contracts kicked in. Danielle frowned. Where is he? Off-grid. Living out near Flagstaff, Arizona. No phone, no credit cards, nothing official in over a year. He's hiding. From what? Ethan hesitated. From whoever silences people like him. The next morning, Danielle flew west. She didn't tell Max the real reason, just left him a note on the fridge that said, "Be brave." Like Mom. The Arizona desert felt like another planet. Dust curled at her ankles as she stepped out of the rental car. The trailer park looked abandoned, sun-bleached siding, cracked pavement, the hum of wind scraping tin. She found the trailer with the name V. Hale scratched into a rusted mailbox. Knocked. Waited. Nothing. She knocked again. Vincent Hale. My name is Danielle Ross. I need to speak with you. It's about Charles Whitaker. Still silence. Then a shadow shifted behind a curtain. A sliver of an eye peered out, then vanished. I'm not here to hurt you, Danielle called. Her voice was steady, but she could feel the weight behind every word. I know why you left. I know what Charles is capable of. But I also know you didn't stay silent for no reason. Please, I'm not asking you to help me. I'm asking you to help stop him. The door opened an inch. A man stood there, shoulders tense. His eyes were wary, voice gravel-worn. You Whitaker's cleanup crew. No, she said. I'm one of the people he destroyed. He watched her a long beat, then stepped aside. Inside the trailer was stripped-down survival. Bottled water, cans stacked in crates, a shotgun resting against a table leg. Vincent didn't sit. He folded his arms and said, I walked away because I was warned. Twice. Second time, someone followed my niece home from school. That's when I left. Danielle nodded. I believe you. I've been followed too. They tried to take my son. A pause. Then she added softly, He's 8. Vincent's eyes shifted, but he didn't speak. You were part of something she said, but you didn't finish it. You held on to the truth. Maybe because deep down, you knew one day someone would come asking for it. Vincent reached behind the old radiator. From a gap in the wall, he pulled out a sealed envelope. I didn't keep this because I thought I'd be a hero. I kept it in case they ever blamed me. Inside were email threads, real ones. Danielle recognized Charles's tone immediately. Cold, calculated, every message a smoking gun, approval codes, off-the-record instructions, money rerouted to fake firms. And then Charles's signature initials she would never forget. Vincent said nothing, just watched her face as she read. Why now, she whispered. Because you came alone, he said. Because you didn't send lawyers. And because if someone still believes this can end, maybe I need to believe that too. She reached for his hand, not to shake it, just to steady herself. You have no idea what this means. Later that night, back in New York, Ethan and Agent Grant cross-checked every detail. Timestamps, IP logs, internal routing codes, every piece lined up. Grant looked stunned. We're not talking circumstantial anymore. This is the nerve center. Danielle sat across the room, silent. Max was asleep in the next room, and for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the silence. Ethan shut the laptop and leaned back. This changes everything. Tomorrow we bring this into court, and Charles Whitaker doesn't know it's coming. Danielle nodded slowly, her voice calm but steady. No more defense, it's time to go on the attack. The courtroom was tense that morning, not with chaos, but with something worse, silence laced with expectation. Danielle sat still, her fingers cold, eyes steady. Today was the day the tide could turn, or crash down on her for good. Ethan stood first. His voice was firm but not loud. Your Honor, the defense calls Vincent Hale to the stand. For a moment the room didn't breathe. Then came a low ripple of reaction. Charles Whitaker's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected this. Not him, not Vincent. Vincent walked in slowly, his suit slightly rumpled, his eyes shadowed but unafraid. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at the press. He looked straight at Charles like he'd waited years for this. Langley jumped to his feet. Objection. Mr. Hale is a disgruntled former employee. His bias. His testimony is supported by authenticated documentation. Ethan cut in, eyes locked on the judge, which the FBI has already reviewed. Judge Myers raised an eyebrow, then glanced down at the sealed folder Ethan handed up. She turned a few pages. Her tone was clipped. Objection overruled. Let's hear him. Vincent was sworn in. He adjusted the mic, then began low, clear, not rehearsed. I worked at Whitaker Development for 7 years, oversaw West Coast infrastructure projects. Around mid-September, I noticed funds being funneled through shell accounts to an entity called Altris Realty. It didn't exist in any vendor records. He paused, eyes narrowing on Charles. I took it to him. Thought I was doing the right thing. Charles told me, and I quote, "Do your job or disappear. You're not paid to be curious." Danielle clenched her jaw. Charles sat motionless, but his fingers drummed faster on the table. Vincent continued. A week later, I was let go. No explanation. And that night, a man parked outside my sister's house for 5 hours. Didn't move. I got the message. Langley stood again, pacing. Mr. Hale, isn't it true you left the company under investigation for mismanagement? Vincent didn't blink. That investigation started the morning after I refused to sign off on a $1.2 million transfer. I kept the emails. They're all here. Ethan stepped forward with a folder thicker than before, labeled Stamped Sealed. He opened it slowly. Exhibit 27. Internal correspondence between Charles Whitaker and executive staff, ordering the redirection of project funds and concealment of audit flags. Verified by digital forensic experts and logged by the Bureau. Langley barked, "Your Honor, we haven't vetted any of this." And then a voice from the back of the room cut through him like glass. "Then allow the Bureau to do it for you." All heads turned as Agent Leo Grant stepped into view. His badge gleamed against the dark lapel of his coat. Every eye in the room followed his slow walk toward the bench. He presented his credentials to Judge Myers, then turned to the courtroom. "I'm Agent Grant, Financial Crimes Division, FBI. We've been investigating Whitaker Development Group for over 9 months. The documents submitted today corroborate our ongoing case, and they are real." Langley looked pale. Charles leaned forward, whispering something, but whatever it was, Danielle couldn't hear. She didn't need to. She saw fear flicker in his eyes for the first time. Judge Myers spoke carefully. "Are you prepared to confirm this under oath, Agent Grant?" "I am." "Then please approach the witness stand." And just like that, the trial turned inside out. The courtroom buzzed now. Not loudly, but like static before a storm. Carla Monroe from the press pool stood without realizing it, recorder forgotten in her hand. She wasn't just reporting anymore, she was witnessing a reckoning. As Agent Grant laid out the pattern of funds, the timeline, the matching transfers that lined up with Danielle's access being revoked, a quiet shift rippled through the gallery. Eyes that once burned with judgment now blinked with doubt. "Ms. Ross didn't fabricate this," Grant said. She identified the pattern. She was silenced before she could expose it. Danielle exhaled slowly. Ethan leaned closer, whispered just above breath, "We just cracked it open." Judge Myers declared a recess, but nobody moved. The moment court adjourned, reporters sprinted outside, cameras already live. Carla Monroe didn't chase. She walked straight to Danielle instead, a strange softness in her voice. "Ms. Ross, if you had one thing to say to the public, what would it be?" Danielle didn't hesitate. "I would say, look again. Look closer. Not just at me, but at who told you I was guilty before you ever saw the truth." Outside, the world was watching differently now. Twitter feeds, news tickers, YouTube clips of Grant's testimony spread like wildfire. Charles Whitaker under federal investigation. FBI backs Danielle Ross in surprise court twist. From suspect to whistleblower. That evening, the comments turned. I believed the headlines. I was wrong. If she was silenced, how many others were too? She stood her ground for her son. Respect. Danielle didn't smile that night, but something in her posture changed. Her spine straighter. Her voice, when she spoke to Max later, steadier than it had been in weeks. Charles, meanwhile, stayed behind in the courtroom. Alone for the first time, with no lawyer speaking for him. Just the cold, growing reality that the story wasn't his to control anymore. And the jury, they were listening now with new ears and different eyes. They asked Charles Whitaker to take the stand. Ethan rose, his voice steady, respectful. "We request testimony from Mr. Whitaker to clarify inconsistencies in the financial timeline." Danielle sat motionless, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. She didn't look at Charles, but everyone else did. He didn't even rise. He just leaned back, one arm slung along the bench behind him, jaw tight like a spring under pressure. "I decline," he said coldly. Judge Myers nodded once without surprise. "Very well. The jury will proceed with deliberation." As the bailiff led the jurors out, the room settled into a hush. Everyone, knowing the storm hadn't passed, just shifted behind a closed door. Danielle leaned into Ethan. "Do you think they believed it?" "They saw the truth," Ethan whispered back. "It's not about believing anymore." But Charles wasn't done. As the jury door clicked shut, something inside him snapped, not like glass, but like steel bending under too much heat. He stood up sharply, sending his chair scraping behind him. "You think this makes her innocent?" He shouted, voice echoing across the wooden walls. "She's nobody. She was nobody. I gave her everything she had." Danielle froze. Everyone did. Charles pointed at her with a trembling hand. "She was an assistant. a glorified note-taker. And I made her matter. Ethan didn't move. Agent Grant, standing off to the side near the prosecution table, folded his arms but said nothing. She was never special, Charles hissed. His face flushed. You all forget I built this company. I built her. She was just the help. There was no gavel strike, no objection, just silence. The kind of silence that turns into memory, the kind people quote later when they try to explain exactly when everything changed. Judge Myers let it sit for a beat. Then, without a word, she turned to the court officer and nodded. Charles was escorted out, still muttering, still denying, but no longer heard. Danielle didn't move. Her face didn't break. But her eyes blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if letting go of something that had haunted her far too long. 20 minutes passed. The jury returned. No theatrics, no suspense music. Just a woman, middle-aged, glasses, perched low, standing to read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant Danielle Ross not guilty. It was quiet for one breath. Then two. And then it happened. A soft exhale from someone in the gallery. A gasp. And finally, the quietest applause, a ripple like rain starting on dry leaves. Danielle lowered her head. Ethan touched her shoulder just briefly. She whispered, "I'm still here." The judge didn't smile, but her tone softened. "You are free to go, Ms. Ross." Carla Monroe stood in the back pen, forgotten in her hand. She didn't write a word, just watched, just absorbed. Because this wasn't just a verdict. It was a reversal of everything they'd been told about who holds power and who gets crushed. As Danielle walked out, the cameras flashed again, but this time they didn't burn. They felt like light. Max was waiting just outside the courtroom, holding his little drawing like it had never left his hands. Danielle knelt in front of him, whispered into his hair, "You were the reason I didn't fall." And inside the courtroom, still echoing somewhere in the wood and the dust, Charles Whitaker's words hung in the air, not as triumph, but as confession. He built her. No, she survived him. And now the world finally knew. The day after the verdict, the courtroom doors were locked, but the ripple of what had happened behind them echoed far beyond the wood-paneled walls. Charles Whitaker's empire, once untouchable, was crumbling in full view. FBI agents swarmed Whitaker Group headquarters. News helicopters hovered above the city skyline like vultures, capturing every step as federal authorities seized hard drives, froze bank accounts, and placed the final nail in a once untouchable legacy. Carla Monroe's article broke first, her tone uncharacteristically solemn. She stood alone and won. Not by screaming, not by power, but by refusing to disappear. It was shared more than 600,000 times within hours. Danielle didn't speak to the media that morning. She sat silently in her small living room, still in the dress she had worn the day before. Her hands rested on her lap, but her fingers kept moving like they were still searching for something to hold on to. Max sat on the floor beside her, coloring in silence. Every so often he looked up at her as if checking to make sure she was still there. "I didn't think it would feel like this," she finally said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "Like what, Mom? Like I got my breath back." She smiled, brushing his cheek. After all this time underwater. Ethan had texted earlier, media requests pouring in. "Only answer the ones you want. You've earned silence, too." She hadn't replied, but she knew he understood. Later that week, she agreed to one interview, a quiet sit-down with a local station, no fanfare. The host asked gently, "If you could sum this entire experience up in one sentence, what would it be?" Danielle took a long pause. Her eyes didn't dart nervously anymore. Her shoulders didn't shrink. "Justice isn't about winning," she said slowly. "It's about truth being heard." And this time it finally was. The host nodded. "Would you do it again?" "I would," she said, her tone calm but certain. "But only because I had Max waiting on the other side of all this. He was the only reason I didn't disappear." That weekend, she walked Max to school like any normal Monday. There were no cameras now, just birdsong sneakers on pavement and the breeze of late spring brushing her face. But when they entered the classroom, something unexpected happened. One by one, the children stood up, not on cue, not with instruction, but as if they knew. Max ran ahead, grinning, then turned to her. "Mom, they read about you in class. Ms. Harper told them you were brave." Danielle blinked fast. She wasn't expecting this. She had prepared herself for legal paperwork, for press calls, for silence. But not for this moment, this quiet echo of respect from little hands and open eyes. Ms. Harper approached and smiled. "We talked about courage last week, and one student said, 'My mom showed me what it looks like.' So they wanted to say thank you." Danielle knelt beside Max and kissed the top of his head. Her voice trembled, but she held it steady. "No one wins alone," she whispered. Outside, Agent Grant stood by his car, watching quietly. He wasn't there for show, just to see it through. As she walked past him, she stopped. "You didn't have to come?" He gave a nod. "You didn't have to fight, but you did." They said nothing more. They didn't need to. And as Danielle turned back toward the schoolyard, sunlight pouring over the sidewalk, she knew the weight was gone, not because the world had changed overnight, but because she had faced it and stayed standing. In the final voiceover, soft and unwavering, she was never a criminal. She was never the villain they painted. She was a woman who carried truth in her bones and refused to let it be buried. In a world eager to silence, she stood and spoke, not for applause, not for revenge, but because some names aren't meant to vanish quietly. Hers was one of them. Danielle's story isn't just about clearing a name. It's about standing firm when the world tells you to sit down. It's about holding on to truth, even when it costs you everything. And most of all, it's about the kind of quiet courage that reminds us justice isn't always loud, but it is worth fighting for. If this story moved you, if it made you stop and think even for a moment, please take a second to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who might be facing their own battle, and this might be the story that gives them strength. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful, true-to-life stories that shine a light on injustice, resilience, and hope. Your support means the world to us, and it gives our team the drive to keep creating content that truly matters. Because here at Mr. Max Stories, we don't just tell stories, we honor the truth behind them. And we remember the names the world tries to forget.